Hi, everybody. I am Andra Annette, and welcome to this week's session of Healing from the Inside Out. So, I have a very special guest with me today, a Dr. Kimberly Harms, and she is a best-selling international author, speaker. She's in dentistry. We're going to let her tell you a little bit more about that, but she's really pivoted into helping people deal with conflict and grief. So, she's a death doula. Yes, a death doula. So I am fascinated. I loved meeting with her, and please help me welcome Dr. Kimberly Harms. So, hi, how are you?
I'm doing wonderful. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well. So, you have so many different aspects of who Dr. Kimberly Harms really is. And I heard about some traumas that you have overcome. You've been through so many things in your life. So, tell me a little bit more about the area of focus because dentistry to death doula, there's a really, to help people dealing with grief, and you're helping the survivors really understand how to navigate after that. So tell me a little bit about that process, will you?
Sure. Well, I'm a dentist by trade, and so I started out in that profession, and then I actually lost the some nerve connections in my drilling fingers, which is not a good thing. And the doctors at Mayo Clinic said I was completely done after working full time for 30 years. So I had, oh, I'm so sorry, for 30 years, and so I I I'm 67 years old, so I'm in that fourth quarter of life, and when you get to be a little older, you've had a lot of things happen to you in your life, and I have. I was born with just seven fingers due to thalidomide. My mother was bipolar. She was the best mother ever, by the way. She was absolutely the best mother ever, but I lost her to suicide when I was 17.
Wow.
I married, yeah, that was a very difficult thing. She was truly a wonderful mother. I think there's a myth that people that are mentally ill can't be good parents, but she absolutely was fabulous. I married my husband when I was 19 years old, Jim, and we became dentists. We practiced together. I was the first woman president of the Minnesota Dental Association, so I was very active in that regard. But when I was at 53, my son, who was 19, my youngest child, Eric Harms, who was a brilliant, brilliant, wonderful, kind, caring, compassionate student at Columbia University, majoring in engineering, but he was also a jazz pianist. He was in theater, and he was elected to student council his freshman year at Columbia. Just this brilliant National Merit Scholar. 45 minutes after his girlfriend broke up with him, took his own life as well.
Oh,
So
wow.
I've
I'm
lost my
so
mother.
sorry.
It was horrible. It was just a completely surprise. People that are, I think when you're a 19-year-old brain that's not fully developed, and you're also a jazz pianist, which is a very impulsive thing. One of the reasons he was so good is he was very impulsive. Uh, and it was just a deadly combination. Really didn't even have time to think, and it just completely devastated my husband and I, and our two daughter. We have two daughters as well. So that complete just wiped me out of your heart is shattered. Anyone that's lost a child knows that this is just one of the worst things that
No greater loss.
ever survive. Yeah, it's just an awful thing, and it was. And uh, but my husband had just had a liver transplant right before that, 6 months before my son died. So he was recovering from that, and my daughters were struggling. We were a very close family, so they were just struggling how to deal with that. And I realized, based upon basically an accusation from a cousin of my husband's, that I had to kind of get myself pulled together. He had lost his brother at 19, and he felt that he had also lost his parents because they were so caught up in their grief they couldn't function, and he just
Mm.
felt lost. And he came up to me, about a month after my son died, and shook his finger at me and said, "Don't you ever let your remaining children feel that they're not enough." And that's probably not something most people could say to a grieving mother. And it was just a shock. But it made me realize that my husband was still trying to recover physically and emotionally. My girls were trying to recover emotionally. And I was kind of in the spot where I had to get myself together as quickly as I could. And I just fought and kicked and screamed and pounded my way out of the grief pit. And anybody that's been in a deep time of grieving knows that pit very, very well. It just
Mm.
feels like it's a hard place to get out of. So it took a while, it took years really for me to get there, but I was working at doing it every day. I was fighting the grief every day. Became a grief counselor after I lost my dental job because of the nerve damage. So I lost my identity as a mother, as a daughter when my mother died. I lost my identity as a mother of a son when my son died. And then just 3 years ago, I lost my identity as a wife when my husband passed away.
Oh
I eventually
no.
passed away, yeah, from heart disease. His liver worked great. Then he lost it due to heart disease, which I believe got started back when my son died. I mean, I think many times, men, I am treated for depression. I will be the rest of my life, and I'm so grateful those treatments are out there. But my husband would never admit to being depressed, and he was from that generation where depression was a weakness, and I believe it affected his heart because his heart was healthy before his son died. So I had to deal with the loss of very, very important people in my life. I had to deal with the complications of suicide that, what do my mother and son have in common? Me, so you can imagine the things, the emotional issues that went on there. And I re-identify myself as a widow rather than a married person. So over this time, I've had to reassess myself, re-identify myself, and learn to live a joyful life. And I, over the years, have worked very, very hard to do that. And then dentistry was my profession. So I taught dental offices how to deal with grief in the office, deal with people when some horrible thing, a catastrophic loss had occurred. How do you manage that in a dental office? And also deal with conflict. In the meantime, I became a conflict manager as well. So uh, I think that all of those areas kind of tied together and it tied together in my life and it made me, what I'm doing today. And I feel that because I've been through all of those things, and I have a very strong faith that I'm here and able to help other people going through it because, that grief and conflict is all around us. And we need to work with people to try to resolve that.
I've lost a lot of people in my life, so I do know the impacts of grief. Firstly, on a bright note, I want to say you look amazing. You do not look like you're 67 years old. So
Thank
whatever
you.
you're doing, keep doing it.
The glasses, glasses and bangs, they cover up, you'll need the Botox.
It's the first time in my life I don't have bangs, and I never realized I had such a big forehead until I got rid of them. Oh, unbelievable.
Oh,
But I want to just reiterate how sorry I am for your losses because it's been 10, 15 years from my mother and my sister, and it still feels like it's yesterday. So I've gotten through the emotions and everything, but you never stop missing them. You never stop feeling that loss. So we do understand that we do have to move on and carry on, and we do know how to put that steps into place, but it's a process and it's ongoing because on Mother's Day or Father's Day for you now and things like that, there that's always going to be a part of us that's different, right? Um
absolutely.
so you is your book related to what you do, might I ask?
Yes, I've got two books. One is Naomi and the Widows Club, which is a one-year devotional for widows. It's a Christian devotional based upon, I had a very, very dear friend who 2 days after my husband passed away, she called and said, Kim, I've been thinking in my life that I want to help widows because my mother was widowed when I was young. My husband's still around, but then my biggest fear is becoming widowed, and she's 85 years old, so she's lived a long life. And she started a widows group. A week after my husband died, I'm in this group surrounded by people who are all widows who help me get through my grief. I really believe in support groups of people who have been through the same thing, who can understand what you're going through, because unless you're going through these things, people don't understand. As try as they might, as hard as they try, they just kind of don't get some of the feelings that you're feeling. So to be with people who have suffered like you have was a wonderful thing. So that first book I wrote was Naomi and the Widows Club, which again is that devotional for widows. But then I thought, as I'm dealing with all of this, my grandchildren, when my husband died, I've been blessed with six grandchildren, which keep me going right now. The six of them, and when my husband died, they were devastated.
Mm-hmm.
And I look around and I see, well, what do we do to help prepare because death is inevitable for all of us.
Mm-hmm.
What do we do to prepare the next generation to manage the time after we die? Because we live in a death denying culture. We don't like to talk about death. And so I thought, what can we do to help them be prepared physically and emotionally better for a time after we die? And so my second book is Are You Ready? How to Build a Legacy to Die For, which goes over legacy building while you're here. So building your legacies while you're here. Then I did become a death doula, and the second chapter is on death and dying, and it describes what people think about death. It's fascinating. We don't like to talk about death, but it's fascinating to talk to people about what they think is going to happen after they die with a very open mind. You'll find the answers are just really fascinating. No better word, just amazing. And then the third part is all the things we need to do to prepare not only getting our affairs in order, because I very clearly outlined that. Make sure you have a will, do a letter of intent, do a healthcare directive, do the things that are going to make your death a little easier for the people behind you. And then I'm also recommending writing letters, love letters to your family for after you die. Letters to your family to open after you die to remind them how much you love them and to remind them that you want them to have a happy life. Because many, many times when you're in the grief pit, if you feel moments of happiness or moments of joy, many times you also feel guilt, which is
Yeah.
kind of crazy. But you do. You have I can't be happy. Oh, I can't be happy right now because I'm still grieving. And I think that's kind of a crazy thing. So and I know that this works because I had one of my little grandchildren, my 7-year-old Heidi, the other day was at the table and she said, Nana, and I said, yeah, Heidi. She goes, if what happened to Pop Pop happened to you. And I said, you mean if I die? She goes, yeah, yeah, Nana, if you die. I said, well, finish the question. And she said, well, if you die, Nana, can we still go to Disney World? and I said, yes, yes. When I die, I want you to go to Disney World. I want you to be happy. I know you're going to miss me and I'm going to miss you, but I want you to go on and live a happy life. And the best way you can honor me is to go out and live a joyful, happy life. And that's a message I really want to bring to our children and to bring to the people that survive us and the people who love us. That we I want us to really work hard to make sure that our lives were mattered in a way that they help to lift the next generation up. If we can each lift each generation up so that they're better off than we were emotionally, our lives are mattered. The time we spent on earth mattered. And that's what I'm trying to get people to look at life and death a little bit differently. Understand death is going to come. It's inevitable. Let's be prepared for it. It's like graduation. Let's be
Mm.
prepared for our graduation from life and do it well. And so now I have my little binder. I'm helping people get little binders put together, 3-ring binders with everything in there, your will, your healthcare directive, passwords, all the things you need to have in there, your titles to your car, your birth certificate, all the things that you might need after you die to make it easier for those people coming behind to take care of everything. They don't have to look through all of your closets and all of your file cabinets to get everything out. They have it in one place. So I'm really trying to recommend that. So I'm looking at the practical part as well as the emotional part.
I love that. Yeah, when my mom died and my sister, they really didn't have any plans in place and there was no real direction. And I do know that at a time of loss, because I just had this conversation with my husband, I have everything planned out, I have everything in place, but he doesn't want to address it. And I said, well, you kind of have to know what to do, you know? he said, "Oh, don't worry about it." He said, "I'm going to have a box right beside me for you. You're not going anywhere." So, but I mean, as funny as that sounds and as charming as that sounds, a lot of people don't want to prepare for it. So the loss of a family member impacted with having to make arrangements or services that aren't planned for or maybe not paid for is just like an even bigger impact on what you're going through, because who has time to think? It's so hard to think through what you're doing at that time, and I know how difficult it was for my sisters and I to navigate that. So uh I love what you're doing. I like that you talk about living life now joyfully, because I find today that a lot of people are not present in where they are now. That everybody says tomorrow, they plan for tomorrow, but they're not enjoying the time now. And a lot of times we push off those things we want to do, and tomorrow never comes. So if we're not living it now and we're planning for our death, but we're not living the now, what does that future really look like? It's grim either way, right? So we are here to have a very purposeful, very loving, caring life and to enjoy life. But so many people today really understand the impacts of why we're here and what life is really all about. So I love that you're explaining these processes to your grandchildren. So, how would you suggest that we make this more part of education for those family members? What does that look like to a family member to sit down and have these conversations with their children?
Yeah, there's some really great resources out there. If you Google the conversation guide, there are all kinds of resources out there to help you have that conversation with your children. And one of the things, I have the same problem, even with my children, and I write books on this, right? Uh, One of the things I tell them is let's get together on Mother's Day, because it's a day to honor me, right? Let's honor me on Mother's Day by getting together to discuss the future. So I'm really talking about let's get together to discuss what happens when I die, but I'm just saying the future. And if you kind of, depending on how you frame it, they're more likely to come together and listen to that. Also, I think having things written down is as clearly as possible is a help because it kind of gives them something to hold on to while they're having this discussion. But it's so important for them to know, and not only after you die, but before you die, because so how many families do you know of that have been torn apart because maybe a will wasn't done, or perhaps they didn't like the way one person was handling uh, the way the mother or father was dying, because some people want hospice. My husband fortunately signed a healthcare directive that says I do not want to go to a hospital. I do not want to be intubated. I want to die at home. So we knew that when we were taking care of him, there was no controversy over how he died. However, there are some times when you put somebody in hospice, there are people that feel, no, 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 that's a death sentence. You need to bring him back in the hospital and do everything you can to keep him alive as long as possible. That's people that really feel that, and that's okay. People do not always agree on these very,
Mm.
very important issues. So it's critical that you talk to your children before you die and have a healthcare directive before you die. So you're making that decision and they don't have to make it. Because if they have to make it, there might be controversy, and that controversy, that uh, conflict can be with them the rest of their lives. And I'm most of us know families where that's happened. Or if you don't write up your will properly and you have to go to probate, what tends to happen many times is anything that you have that could be passed down to your children ends up going to the lawyers. And my daughters are lawyers, so yeah, that's good for them. But pass, think clearly. I mean, that really it does, because people are fighting, they're fighting, and who gets the most money? It's the lawyers trying to get it all worked out. So try to do that to help prevent your children from having conflict afterwards. My greatest legacy is that my two daughters get along very well, and I want to keep it that way. And when my husband and I wrote our wills, they're both attorneys, so we sent it to both of them and we said, look at this will. If there's anything you don't like, tell us now. We'll talk about it. But forever hold your peace because we're going to sign it on this day. And if you don't object, we're going to sign it. And then you just have to be happy with it. And so I think that, and I have any of my jewelry or things that they might like to have. Kids don't like to keep as much stuff as we used to like to keep. So maybe they don't like the china, but I have them kind of go down and go back and forth and choose what jewelry, for instance, they might like, and I have it all written down. So the important things that you're going to give away to people after you die, it's important to write it down if you can, or have a systematic way to make that decision so people aren't fighting over who gets the casserole dish or something. But families do that. It can cause
I
all kinds
know.
of
I
tension in the
know.
family.
I'm
Yeah,
in healthcare a long time, and even in the institutions I work in, I see what happens with the family, even arguing over their level of care, like end of life, who wants hospice, who doesn't. And even with those advanced directives in progress, and they still are arguing, no, he would have never wanted that, who made him sign it. So even with all those directives in place, people still argue.
yes,
And a lot of people see hospice as cruel, and it's really not. It's a beautiful, beautiful
it's
thing.
beautiful.
So I think it's important to educate people about the different processes and about the different things that they really can sign up for at the end of life. So um, they have a better understanding. So I like that you're having these conversations with your children and that you're doing all these things. And do you speak on this publicly? Because I know you do a lot of speaking, but it looked like it was with the dentistry. So is this what you're speaking on now?
Yes, so last year I made a life decision. I think when you talked about finding joy, I made a life decision that I was speaking all over the place for dentistry on these topics, but still just within a small community. And I was missing a lot of my grandchildren's basketball games and uh, recitals and all the little things they do that to make life so much fun. So I decided about a year ago, and I just finished up about January to kind of cut down on that. I'm not doing that really anymore. I'm going to have to redo my website and focus on this because I think this is such an important issue. Doing things like webinars is great. Podcasts such as yours is wonderful to spread the news. But I'm also working in my church. I have a seminar scheduled. I've done several number of seminars, but I have one scheduled in a couple of months where I'm making a workbook as well so that they can leave with a workbook. Anybody that wants their healthcare directive signed and notarized, or we just need a double signature here in Minnesota, will have that. We're going to have stations so that people can do their little legacy video. We're going to have stations where people can write legacy letters, and we're going to help them get as much of this done as they can and get started on it. Because I think one of the things that is helpful is if you have a motivation within a group to get things done. I'm recommending book clubs get together and go through the process and make sure they get all of their affairs in order. I did that with my book club, and
Wow,
I think
great
working in
idea.
groups, yeah, because we need it. So for me, I mean, just show you how hard it is. For me, I had to write the book to really get it completely done because I figured if I write the book, I better do this stuff, right? So I had to write the book. But I think having a group help you do it might be helpful. Although you certainly can do it on your own. It's a very simple thing, very simple steps to take. You can do it on your own. But if you have a group that helps hold you accountable, that might be one way to help you get it done. So I'm working with my church group right now to do that. And I'll let you know how it works out. But they're very excited about it now. In fact, many of them are actually putting the workbook together. I'm writing it and they're putting it together for me because I'll be gone. But it's really fun to see um, how many people realize that this is an important thing to do. And I talk about being in the fourth quarter, and I know I'm in the fourth. At 67, I'm in the fourth quarter of my life. But if you're younger, you don't know if you're in the fourth quarter. We people that are older know they're in the fourth quarter because we have kind of a life
Yeah,
expectancy.
so true.
But you could be in the fourth quarter. You could be 30 and in your fourth quarter. You don't know. So it's just as important, just like it's important to get life insurance for your family, it's important to have an emotional life insurance plan, which is getting all your stuff together and leaving them strong emotionally, even when you're 30, even when you're 25. It's important to do that. But most people that are my age know that it's important because our clock is ticking. So we realize that our time is limited and we're probably a little more motivated to get that done.
I know that when my sister died unexpectedly, that was what really put the balls in place for me for life insurance. I signed up that week for myself and my family because I saw the impacts it has. But I think that it's exciting that they're excited about planning that because I think that a lot of people, as we age, we start to look back on our lives and if things went well and we did the things that we had planned, then when we self-actualize, we have contentment and joy. But when we haven't done any of those things, we have resentments and we don't feel whole and we're not happy with that stage of our life. But somehow knowing that you've planned for a better future, I think that feeds into that self-actualization because I think when you go to the doctor, I mean, because it can happen to anyone. You go to the doctor and he says, I'm sorry, you only have a couple of months to live. Do you want to spend those couple of months planning how to die or live the rest of those couple of months? So I think this can really impact people on a very large scale globally because I don't think, like you said, a lot of people talk about death. I think even though it's a given, we all know that it's gonna happen. I think that people are just not comfortable with the topic itself. It makes them uneasy.
Right. And it's one of the reasons I focus on the legacy development because no matter what your past was, you can start today to build a legacy, a positive legacy. And my plan is in the next year, I've talked to work with people that are in prison to help develop their legacy. Start now. You might have had a horrible past, but you can build your legacy starting right now. Maybe life certainly didn't turn out for me the way I thought it was going to be. I just sold our cabin that my husband and I had, our dream retirement home. But now that he's gone, it doesn't mean the same. So I just, sold that plan that I had for myself. So the plans that we make for ourselves don't always come out. And I think that what we need to do is we can't change the past. Just look at where we are now, what we have now, the people that we affect now, and start building your legacy today. And when you do that, if you're realizing every day that your time is limited, it becomes more urgent. If you live every day like your last, people talk about that. How would you live? And it becomes more urgent. And I know that since I think after my husband died, especially because I was alone for the first time. I got married when I was 19. And being alone, when you become a widow or a widower, or people certainly that are divorced would have the same thing. All of a sudden you're alone. It really changes things. And I had to kind of readjust my life and say, okay, now what, God's done with my husband. His life is done, but I'm still here. So there's still a purpose for me. And I think if we live our lives knowing that there's a purpose for us, that makes all the difference. There's something I can do. This is something I can do. I can be at my children's basketball games. That's my purpose. That's one of the reasons I gave up the speaking because anybody, there are other people that can speak on dentistry, but there's no other maternal grandmother for my grandkids. And so
Correct.
I'm there for as much as I can. So it also kind of your accomplishments are not, you don't have to win a Nobel Prize or an Academy Award. You just being there for people is your legacy. Your legacy doesn't have to affect a lot of people. If you're there for one person, that's a legacy. And when you start thinking that way, you become more content, you become more grateful, and you become more joyful. And I think that's the key. Being able to live a joyful life, no matter what your circumstances. And I learned that in Rwanda. I spent a lot of time in Rwanda. We have 25 libraries there, and 65, excuse me, we have 65 libraries there. And I go to Rwanda quite a bit. And, they overcame a genocide. They were recovering from a genocide back in 1994. And you would not believe some of the most joyful people I've ever met in my life are survivors of genocide in Rwanda whose entire families were killed. Women who were given, raped and given AIDS and maybe even had a child by the rapist or are living joyful lives. How can that be? It made me really realize when I went there and I talked to these amazing people that if they can live a joyful life, then I can live a joyful life. And so I'm trying to pass that on now. They've passed that on to me, and I hope to pass that on now too. that you can live a joyful life. And it's, having lived at the grief pit for a number of years, and it sounds like we all go down in there every once in a while. Having lived in the grief pit, that's not a place I want to stay. That's a terrible place to live. And by learning through gratitude and through having a purpose in your life and moving forward, learning to live with joy in your heart and gratitude in your heart for what you do have is such a wonderful place to be.
I
And
agree.
it takes work. It takes work. It doesn't, you can't just pop out of that grief pit. You don't pop out like a jack in the box, but it's a lot of work to get out. But I think if you strive and realize that it's a battle, that does help you to get out there, and it's worth it. It's absolutely worth it, to be able to enjoy my grandchildren without that shroud, because when you're living in grief
Yeah.
and sadness, you live in a shroud, and you kind of, you're like halfway, it's like a zombie. You kind of halfway enjoy things, but you don't really enjoy things, right? And so if you can work through that grief phase, and find the joy and gratitude, and many times the best way you find that is to be useful to other people, to have a purpose, to help other people. Um, it's just a wonderful way to live and a wonderful place to be living in joy.
I love what you're doing. I'm having such an amazing time just listening to you. I think that the audience is absolutely going to love you because this is
Thank you.
something that I think touches every single one of us on a day-to-day experience. So, if you could tell the audience the biggest thing that was like that aha moment to you on this journey that really helped you, what would that be?
It was that moment when I was told not to let my children feel that they were not enough. I was told that by my nephew. I think I described that. And it made me realize that, wow, I there every sad feeling I have or happy feeling I have is felt by the people around me. And it made me decide to work hard to get to that place because I did not want my children to feel that they are not enough. And that, I think, because I did that, I now am able to live joyfully with everybody. And then also now that I've kind of pivoted to something I feel is useful and helpful to the people around me, uh, that part of, again, of being useful in life, grateful in life, joyful in life is the biggest lesson I've learned, and probably my biggest accomplishment. I might have a little bit of a resume, that I could put on paper that might look good to the world, but that's not important. My biggest accomplishment is learning to find joy no matter what my circumstances. And if you can do that as a goal, and it's not going to be easy, and I don't at all want to diminish the work that it takes, and that some people can never get there. I mean, some people it's just can never seem to get there, and that's okay. There's no judgment, but work, 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 because it's worth it. It's so worth it to be able to live in joy and gratitude.
I love that. I love that you say not everybody can get there too, because and there's no and there is no judgment. So I want
No.
the audience to be able to connect with you because I think you're going to be very busy in the upcoming future. I think there's a lot of people that need your services. So before we close, can you tell people where they could find you?
Yes, if they just go to drkimberlyharms.com, that's my website. They can buy the book there. They can contact me through there, and I'd be happy to answer any questions anyone has, and be as helpful as I can.
Thank you so much for this conversation. I've had an amazing time. I want to thank the audience for their time, and as always, have a great night. Take care.